They say love makes you stupid. At 43, I thought I was too old for that kind of foolishness. I had my own business, my own house, my independence carved out of years of hard work and harder lessons. But when Deon walked into my marketing firm that Tuesday morning in September, all my wisdom seemed to evaporate like morning mist. He was 32, which felt significant then, old enough to be serious, young enough to make me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten. Tall, with those amber eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a smile that made promises he'd never intended to keep. He was pitching his personal training business, looking for marketing help to expand his client base. He leaned forward in my conference room chair, explaining that he could pay half up front, with the rest coming once the campaign started bringing in results. I should have said no. My standard policy was full payment before any work began. But something about the way he looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, made me agree to terms I'd never accept from anyone else. Maybe it was the echo of James from 10 years ago, back when I was still building my business from a cramped studio apartment. I'd given him everything I had then, my time, my energy, cooking dinner every night, even when I was surviving on ramen myself. But when his ex-girlfriend inherited her grandmother's trust fund, suddenly my homemade meals couldn't compete with five-star restaurants. James told me I was amazing as he packed his things, but said she could give him stability. Stability. That was the word that haunted me for years. I heard myself agreeing to Deon's terms. The first red flag came disguised as a compliment. After our third coffee meeting, he reached across the table and touched my hand, telling me I wasn't like other women my age, that I actually took care of myself. I felt a flush of pleasure at the time. Now I see it for what it was, the first subtle cut, positioning himself as someone doing me a favor by finding me acceptable. We started dating officially in October. Our first real date was dinner at Romano's, the upscale Italian place downtown. When the check came, he patted his pockets theatrically, claiming he'd left his wallet in his other jacket. He promised to pay me back, of course. I paid. Of course I paid. The pattern was so familiar it hurt. 28-year-old me had done the same dance with Eric, back when I was waitressing nights and taking business classes during the day. I'd pay for our dates with tip money, buy him small gifts I couldn't afford because I thought love meant giving everything you had. Until the day I overheard him on the phone with his friend, saying I tried so hard, but he needed someone who has already made it, someone who could keep up. He was gone by the weekend, chasing after a pharmaceutical sales rep with a company car and expense account. I'd sworn then that I'd never let financial insecurity cost me love again. Now, with money in the bank and success under my belt, I thought I was giving from a position of strength. I thought generosity would be seen as love, not desperation. How wrong I was. He suggested we go back to my place afterward, his hands already finding the small of my back in that way that made my knees weak. I forgot all about the unpaid dinner. The sex was incredible. I won't lie about that. Deon knew exactly what he was doing, and for the first time in years, I felt desired. Really, truly wanted. He would trace the lines of my body like he was memorizing them, whisper that I was amazing, that he couldn't believe I was with someone like him. But here's the thing about manipulation. It's most effective when it feels like love. And I was starving for it. By November, Deon was staying over 4 nights a week. My grocery bills doubled. He had a key to my house, but never seemed to have money for gas when he came over. His phone was always getting shut off for non-payment, so he'd use mine for hours, talking to clients and friends while I worked late to cover the revenue loss from the discounted rate I'd given him. He'd always reassure me that he was good for the money, that once his business took off, he'd spoil me rotten. The business never took off. My brilliant marketing campaign generated leads, but Deon couldn't seem to convert them into paying clients. There was always an excuse. The gym owner was being difficult, the client changed their mind, the economy was rough for personal training. What I didn't know then was that Deon was sleeping with 3 of those potential clients. I wouldn't discover that until much later, when it was almost too late to do anything about it. December brought the first real fight. I'd asked him to contribute something toward groceries, not half, not even a quarter, just something to acknowledge that he was eating meals at my house every day. He was incredulous. He asked me if I was seriously trying to charge him for food, said he thought we were in a relationship, not some kind of business transaction. The way he said business transaction made it sound dirty, mercenary. Like I was the one being unreasonable. I tried to explain that it wasn't about charging him, it was about contribution, about partnership. He stood up from my kitchen table, suddenly looking very young and very tall. He said maybe he should just go back to his place if I was going to nickel and dime him. The threat of him leaving hit me like a physical blow. I backpedaled immediately, apologizing, telling him he was right. Couples don't keep score like that. He softened then, came over and pulled me into his arms, telling me he knew I had such a generous heart. He said that's what he loved about me. Love. He'd said love. The first time either of us had used that word. I should have questioned why. It only came out during an argument. I should have wondered why he wielded it like a weapon to end my resistance. Instead, I melted. Christmas was when I should have seen everything clearly, but love, or what I thought was love, is a powerful blindfold. Deon had been dropping hints about wanting a new laptop for weeks. His old one was holding back his business development, he said. I found myself at Best Buy on December 23rd, spending $1,800 on a MacBook Pro. His face when he opened it Christmas morning was worth every penny. Pure joy like a child. He kissed me so thoroughly I forgot to notice he hadn't gotten me anything in return. When I finally did notice, he looked genuinely pained, explaining that my gift was being delivered late due to supply chain issues. The gift never came. But by then, I had bigger problems to worry about. January brought a new low. Deon's car broke down, needed a new transmission. He couldn't work without a car, couldn't build his business, couldn't pay me back. The repair estimate was $3,200. He hated asking me, he said, but could I help him out? Just a loan. He'd pay me back with interest once he was mobile again. I had the money. I always had the money. That was my curse, and his opportunity. I paid for the transmission. But here's where the story takes its first real turn, where the victim becomes something else entirely. I also installed a tracking app on that new laptop I'd bought him. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it the last dying gasp of my common sense. I told myself I just wanted to see if he was really working as hard as he claimed. What I discovered changed everything. Dating profiles. Multiple dating profiles. He described himself as single and ready to mingle with shirtless photos I'd taken of him in my backyard. Messages to women where he called himself unattached and looking for something real. But that wasn't the worst part. That was just the appetizer for the main course of betrayal. The worst part was the group chat with his friends. Screenshots of our text conversations with laughing emojis. Photos of my house with comments about how he'd struck gold. Detailed discussions about how long he could milk this situation before having to cut and run. And then I saw the message that didn't just break my heart, it incinerated it. He'd written that the old broad was so desperate she'd believe anything. He just had to keep me thinking I had a chance at keeping him. Old broad. That's what I was to him. Desperate. A mark, not a girlfriend. A walking ATM with benefits. I sat in my home office at 2 a.m., staring at the screen, and felt something die inside me. But something else was being born, something cold and calculating and absolutely lethal. I didn't confront him. Not yet. That would have been the old Sarah, the one who begged for scraps of affection. Instead, I started planning his destruction. The next morning, Deon bounced into my kitchen like nothing had changed, calling me gorgeous and kissing the top of my head while I made him breakfast. He asked what was on the agenda for the day. I told him I had a surprise for him. His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Of course they did. Surprises from me always meant money or gifts. He was practically salivating. I told him I'd been thinking about what he said about expanding his business. What if we became real partners? What if I invested properly in his company? Made it official? Deon nearly choked on his coffee. He asked how official I was talking. I explained I was talking about a real investment. $50,000 to start. But we need to do it right. Contracts, business partnership agreements, the whole thing. I watched his face carefully. Greed warred with caution. Greed won, just like I knew it would. He said it sounded amazing, that he couldn't believe I'd really do that for him. I corrected him. It was for us, for our future. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. Not to set up a business partnership, to get advice on recording laws and evidence collection. Turns out that in our state, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. Good to know. The next few weeks were pure theater. I played the role of the smitten older woman ready to throw her life savings at a younger man. Deon played the role of the grateful boyfriend, probably already planning how to disappear once he had access to my money. We met with a lawyer, my lawyer, though Deon didn't know that. I had papers drawn up that looked legitimate, but contained some very specific clauses that Deon, in his eagerness and his arrogance, didn't bother to read carefully. He told me this was really happening, that I was incredible, that I wouldn't regret this decision. But I was already recording everything. Every conversation, every promise, every lie that fell from his beautiful mouth. The contract signing was scheduled for a Friday. That Thursday night, Deon came over with champagne and an uncharacteristic thoughtfulness. He told me he'd been thinking, after tomorrow, everything would change for us. We were going to be real partners. I agreed. Real partners. He kissed me then, and for a moment I almost wavered. Almost let myself believe that maybe I'd misunderstood what I'd seen, that maybe he did care about me. Then he pulled back and smiled, delivering the final blow to any remaining doubt I might have had. He said when we first met, he never thought it would work out like this. Asked him why not, keeping my voice curious, not accusatory. Deon had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. He said I knew what he meant. I was a successful, independent woman, but I was also at a stage in life where options were limited. He was probably the best I was going to do. The best I was going to do. He actually said that. I nodded slowly, as if I agreed. As if I found his assessment reasonable. He warmed to his theme then, telling me not to get him wrong. He cared about me really. But we should be realistic about what this was. I asked him what this was exactly. He explained it was mutually beneficial. I got companionship, he got, well, I was taking care of him. It worked. I was taking care of him. Like he was a pet. A service I was paying for. I told him he was absolutely right. It did work. Friday morning arrived bright and clear. Deon showed up at my office in a new suit I'd bought him for the occasion. He was practically vibrating with excitement. He joked about me making him a rich man as we walked into the conference room. I replied that I was ready to give him exactly what he deserved. The lawyer, my lawyer, spread the papers out on the table. The investment contract, the partnership agreement, and one additional document that Deon hadn't seen before. He asked what the last one was. I said it was just a formality, a disclosure agreement. Standard stuff. Deon barely glanced at it before signing. That was his second mistake. His first was underestimating me. Once all the papers were signed, I congratulated him as my new partner. He grinned back, asking when he'd get access to the funds. I told him that's where things got interesting. I nodded to my lawyer, who slid a tablet across the table. Deon looked at the screen. His face went white. It was a video compilation. Him on dating apps. Screenshots of his messages to other women. Audio recordings of his conversations with his friends where he admitted to using me. Photos of him with other women that I'd found on his social media. Photos taken on days when he'd told me he was working. He stammered, asking what this was. I explained calmly that this was leverage. That last document he'd signed? It wasn't a disclosure agreement. It was a confession. He'd just admitted, in writing and on the record, to obtaining money and gifts from me under false pretenses. That was fraud. It was also theft by deception. The lawyer leaned forward with the next blow, explaining that the contract he'd just signed included some interesting clauses. Any funds released to him came with specific performance requirements. Failure to meet those requirements resulted in immediate repayment of all monies received during the course of his relationship with me, plus interest, plus penalties. Deon stared at the papers like they might bite him. He said he didn't understand. I made it simple for him. He owed me $23,847 for money spent on him over the past 6 months, plus another $1,800 for the laptop, $3,200 for his car repairs, and various other expenses I documented. The business partnership agreement he'd just signed made him liable for all of it if he failed to meet the performance standards outlined in the contract. He asked what performance standards. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Fidelity for one. Honesty for another. Both of which he'd already violated, as evidenced by the materials on that tablet. Deon shot to his feet, shouting that this was insane, that I couldn't do this. I told him that, actually, I could. It was all perfectly legal. He was welcome to have his own lawyer review the documents, but I should mention that he had 30 days to begin repayment, or I'd start releasing those videos and recordings to everyone in his contact list, including his mother, his ex-wife, and every potential client in his business network. The blood drained from his face. He said my name like a prayer, begging me to talk about this rationally. I stood up slowly and asked him about rationality. Was it rational for him to call me an old broad to his friends? Was it rational to maintain active dating profiles while sleeping in my bed? Was it rational to tell me I should be grateful for his attention because of my limited options? He'd forgotten about the laptop. Forgotten that I had access to everything. He started to say he never meant those things, but I cut him off with a rise of my hand. Of course, he meant every word. The only thing he didn't mean was any of the sweet things he said to me. Deon tried a different approach. He moved toward me, reaching out like he was going to touch my face, calling me baby, and saying I knew how he felt about me. Those other things were just guy talk, he insisted. They didn't mean anything. I stepped back and told him not to touch me. Then he said it. He said he loved me. And there it was. The word he'd only said once before, deployed now as a weapon of desperation. I told him no. He didn't love me. He never did. And I wasn't sure I ever loved him either. I think I loved the idea of him, the idea of being wanted, of being chosen. But the real him? The man who saw my generosity as weakness, my affection as desperation? I didn't love him at all. Deon slumped back into his chair and asked what I wanted from him. I told him I wanted him to disappear. I wanted him to transfer his share of the business partnership back to me, which, according to the contract, he could do without penalty if it's done within 48 hours. I wanted him to return the laptop, the clothes, and anything else I bought him. And then I wanted him to get out of my life. He asked what would happen if he did all that. I explained that I'd keep the recordings private. He'd go his way, I'd go mine, and we'd pretend this never happened. The lawyer nodded confirmation that the contract allowed for dissolution under these terms. Deon was quiet for a long moment. You really planned all this out, didn't you? He said. I confirmed that I had every detail. He went on to ask why I didn't just break up with him. Why the elaborate setup? I considered the question. I told him it was because he needed to understand that I wasn't some desperate old woman grateful for scraps of attention. I was someone who built a successful business from nothing. Someone smart enough to see through his act and resourceful enough to do something about it. I leaned forward and told him he'd mistaken my kindness for weakness. That was his biggest mistake. 2 days later, everything was finalized. Deon returned my things, signed the dissolution papers, and walked out of my life forever. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he left town shortly after. Something about wanting a fresh start somewhere people didn't know his story. The $50,000 never left my account, of course. The whole investment story was fiction, a carrot to make him reveal his true nature on the record. Do I regret it? Sometimes I wonder if I went too far. If I let anger and hurt turn me into someone I don't recognize. But then I remember how he looked at me that last night, like I was lucky to have him, like I should be grateful for the privilege of funding his lifestyle while he shopped around for something better. I remember the group chat messages, the casual cruelty of how he described me to his friends. I remember the dating profiles, active the entire time we were together. I remember him telling me he was the best I was going to do at my age. And I realized that what I regret isn't my revenge. What I regret is how long it took me to value myself enough to demand better. How many red flags I ignored because I was so afraid of being alone that I accepted being used. I'm 43. I'm successful, intelligent, and yes, still beautiful. Not because some 32-year-old con artist deigned to tell me so, but because I've learned to see it in myself. My options aren't limited. They never were. Deon taught me that in the end, just not in the way he intended. The favor he thought he was doing me, gracing me with his presence, accepting my generosity, turned out to be the favor he did for himself. He revealed exactly who he was and exactly who I am. I'm not a desperate old broad. I'm a woman who won't be played for a fool twice. And that's worth more than any relationship built on lies.